Hi everyone, I'm Lasad Gada. I'm a senior teacher of English and ICT consultant and trainer. And I'm more than glad to be with you today to deal with lesson 6, which is entitled Urban Exodus. It's the sixth lesson of unit number 4, which title is Life Issues. And we'll try to start by the title itself. As you have noticed, it's Urban Exodus. And first things first, I'd very much like to thank Mr. Hatem Al-Khalifi, who has kindly provided pedagogical counseling. So we start by going over the lesson objectives. So by the end of this lesson, the student should be able to understand what is meant by urban exodus, to differentiate between the advantages and drawbacks or disadvantages of urban exodus, and add other pros and cons. By pros we mean advantages, and cons we mean drawbacks. Next, the student should also be able to understand the meaning of theme-related vocabulary, to link contrasting sentences and ideas, and finally to exploit a video and the ideas that it contains in order to give advice on how to deal with a problematic situation. So let's get started. Maybe not all of you are familiar with this expression, which is urban exodus. That's why we'll together focus on the 5 slides and choose the correct definition of urban exodus. So, urban exodus is when a large number of highly skilled people choose to live and work in developed countries. The second alternative is this. It's when a large number of the population leave big cities to move to the suburbs or rural areas. And the third alternative, as you see here, it reads when a large number of the population leave rural areas in order to settle in big cities. So, to help you guess the meaning or make the right choice, we have a group of slides. We'll focus on them. Actually, there are 5 slides, and they hopefully will help us guess the right meaning. So the video was, I hope, very helpful in order to help you understand the meaning of urban exodus. And the answer is, as you can see, it's the following. So urban exodus is when a large number of the population leave big cities to move to the suburbs or rural areas. Right. Now, together we'll try to focus on this matrix. It's a table, and we'll try to complete it with the suitable information. Well, city dwellers are flocking to rural areas, compelled by, and at the same time lured or attracted by. So you have noticed that there are many, or you may also know, not only we as adults, you know this, but also youngsters, students too, can really feel the need to leave the city in order to settle in the countryside, but also they can also be lured by, I mean, some advantages or attracted by some pros that may attract them and make them opt for a new life in the countryside. Now, we'll try together to have a look at another video, and it's here to help us complete the matrix with the suitable information. So, now that we have watched the video, I guess we can come up with very important information related to the table. So, city dwellers are flocking to rural areas, compelled by many factors. So, maybe the first one would be the stressful life they lead, the daily routine, and the fact that life in the city is monotonous. Another factor is definitely the polluted environment and the noisy environment they live in, added to the fact that competition for jobs has increased unemployment. So you have noticed that all these factors relate to different fields, be it employment, the environment, and also some psychological factors that might affect city dwellers' life. Let's move on now to the second part of this table, and it's related to the things that attract people to settle in the countryside. So a lifestyle which is way calmer and more relaxing. Another factor, maybe this existence of new professional activities and potential job opportunities. So this may relate to this negative aspects of city life, the fact that competition for jobs has increased unemployment. Next, we can also mention the environment, a cleaner environment with fewer pollutants, and of course the neighborhood, a friendlier neighborhood and social circle, added to this sense of adventure and risk-taking that may really push someone to try or to have a go by trying to live in the countryside. Now, we have a text to consider today, and this text is taken from the textbook, and we'll read the text together and match the following titles with the corresponding paragraph. As you have noticed, we have 5 paragraphs to consider, and these headings or titles should be inserted in the right, or with the right paragraph. So, these are the reasons to move. Well, in paragraph 1, we focus here on community, the community in villages in the countryside. So the report finds that people in villages are 3 times more likely than those in large towns to consider their community as vibrant or lively. So it's a report actually, and it was taken from the Evening Standard, and it dates back to June the 21st, 2004. So let's now move on to the second paragraph. Many in the countryside outlive their urban counterparts by almost 18 months on average, with a life expectancy of 77.2 years compared with 75.8 years in the city. For paragraph 3, you have certainly noticed that we're talking about the environment. So as peak levels of harmful ozone in the countryside air have fallen by about 30% in the past decade. Rivers are also much less polluted, with 65% of rural rivers having water quality rated as very good or good. When it comes to the 4th paragraph, it also has to do with the environment, but more precisely with an indicator of the ecological health of any area. It's the destruction of the countryside and also the populations of wild birds. So the destruction of the countryside of recent decades appears to be slowing down. Population of wild birds, seen as a good indicator of the ecological health of an area, have leveled out after 2 decades of decline, which is really a stunning thing to know. Now, let's finish with paragraph 5. It's about economy. So it reads here, the rural economy is booming despite the crisis in farming, and rural unemployment is running at just 3.3%, and 270,000 new jobs have been created in the countryside in the past 5 years. Much information which is really very, very important to make us really understand those who opt for a change in their lifestyle and to opt for moving to the countryside. So let's focus on some keywords that do exist in paragraph number 1. you have noticed here that we speak about a lively community, and I think that if we focus on the headings or titles, it's definitely this sense of community, which is the main idea. When it comes to the second paragraph, we'll also focus on some key words, like the verb to outlive. The verb to live is there, and this life expectancy of 77.2 years. So it's health and life expectancy, which is the main focus in this second paragraph. When it comes to the third paragraph, if we focus on rivers, if we focus on ozone or the harmful ozone, the levels of harmful ozone in the countryside air, so it's definitely air quality which is dealt with. And the area in focus in paragraph number 4 is also the environment, as it's related to the destruction of the countryside and the populations of wild birds. Now, when it comes to paragraph 5, so you have this rural economy which is booming. So I think also these figures that exist here will lead us to no other choice but strong economy. Now, let's move on to the pull factors. And the text states that city dwellers are flocking to rural areas driven by a number of pull factors. And by pull factors here, I mean the things that may really encourage you or push you to take a decision, or an important decision, or take a risk. So here we talk about the fact that the community in villages is vibrant. It's also stated in the text that there is a higher life expectancy. The environment is really an important pull factor. It's about the water quality and, of course, the quality of countryside air. There is also this fact that populations of wild birds have leveled out after 2 decades of decline. And, of course, when we speak about things that may make somebody really make an important decision, we speak about money, economy, namely, and employment. So it's a booming rural economy. It's a rate of employment which is really low compared to or with the one in the city. Now that we have read the text, we'll move on to some vocabulary which is relevant to this topic, and we'll together try to choose the right option. We'll focus on this first item, which is the verb to boom. So if business is booming, it means that it's increasing and becoming successful very quickly, causing serious harm or trying to improve. Well, you all remember that while reading the text, we spoke of this, or about this, as being a pull factor. So the answer is the following. If business is booming, it means that it is increasing and becoming successful very quickly. Now we move on to another word, which is decade. So I have provided you here with 3 alternatives. So decade means 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. Well, we'll focus on the answer. It means 10 years. Now we move on to the third item, which is the adjective vibrant. And we have here an example. It's about Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is often described as Asia's most vibrant city because it's unstable, extremely boring, or full of activity. Well, if we focus on the answer, we'll find that the third alternative is the correct one. Well, and even in the sentence itself, we can understand that it's a city first, it's in Asia, and it's Hong Kong. So I don't think Hong Kong could be related to as being an extremely boring or unstable part of this world. Now, we move on to this expression, life expectancy. And you have here 3 alternatives, as we did for the other expressions. So A, is it the length of time that a person is expected to live? Or is it the time when a person is expected to retire? or the time when people decide to change their lifestyle? So the answer is the following. Life expectancy is the length of time that a person is expected to live. And if we focus on this very word here, expectancy, so you all know the verb to expect. So I don't think we can get really misled by this noun. So the expression, as you have noticed, has this definition, the length of time that a person is expected to live. Right, now, moving on now. We have this verb, which is to outlive. It's the verb in focus on this sentence. And if we just focus on the verb itself, we find that we have this verb to live. Okay, so the composition of it can be so helpful to understand its meaning. Mind you, I have provided you here with three alternatives. A, to lead a more comfortable life. B, to live longer. Or C, to face more challenges. So if we focus again on the verb in the sentence, I don't think we'll have any other choice but this second alternative. So the fact that people in villages outlive those living in the city means that they live longer. Right, now we move on to this phrasal verb. And I suppose you are all familiar with phrasal verbs. The verb is to level off. So if prices begin to level off, this means that A, increase suddenly, or B, drop suddenly, or C, stop rising or declining and become steady. Well, the answer is the following. So if prices begin to level off, this means that they stop rising or declining and become steady. So we refer to a context of stability, of steadiness. Next, we have here a word which is rated, and you have noticed that it's underlined and it's written in bold. So if you're rated as one of the outstanding managers in your company, this means that you don't have enough work experience to become a manager. That's alternative A. For B, you're considered as one of the best managers. C, you no longer need to work for that company. Well, you have noticed that the context itself is kind of positive. So the answer is the following. If you're rated as one of the outstanding managers, this means that you're considered as one of the best managers, the top performance in the company. Right. Now we'll focus on paragraph 5. And it was taken from the text, and it's here. We'll pick out a paradoxical situation from paragraph 5. Well, it reads here that rural economy is booming despite the crisis in farming. Rural economy, unemployment is running at just 3.3%, and 270,000 new jobs have been created in the countryside in the past 5 years. So we'll together focus on this paragraph and try to find a situation which is paradoxical, a situation in which there is contrast. Well, having read the paragraph carefully, we'll find that the very first sentence relates to a paradoxical situation. So I read it again. The rural economy is booming despite the crisis in farming. In other words, we have two facets. The first one is that the rural economy is booming. When it comes to the second facet, which is in a stark contrast with the first, it's this one, the crisis in farming. There is a crisis in farming. So there is a conjunction, a linking word that is used to express contrast in this sentence. It's despite. We'll get into more details, and here we'll rewrite, or you will rewrite the sentence or the following sentence starting as given. I read it. So the rural economy is booming despite the crisis in farming. One more time, you can see the conjunction, which is there. It's despite. However, you're here asked to rewrite the sentence starting by another conjunction. It's although, or though. All right? Now, let's try to read again the sentence. So you see that we have two contrasting situations. The first one is positive, whereas the second is negative. And if we use although or though, we'll get this sentence, which expresses the same function. So I read it. Although there is a crisis in farming, or though there is a crisis in farming, the rural economy is booming. So this may raise questions, and we'll try to deal with these questions, these grammatical points together by completing this rule. So to express contrast, we use despite, or in spite of, or although. However, you have certainly noticed that what is after each conjunction is kind of different. So we'll focus more on the first sentence. So despite the crisis in farming, you have noticed that the crisis in farming cannot be considered as a full sentence, as it does not really contain a sentence with a subject and a verb that relates to it. So to express contrast, we use in spite of or despite plus a noun or a noun clause. However, if I focus on although in this second sentence that expresses the same function, we'll notice that we have a sentence. There is a crisis in farming. It's a complete sentence, but it is part of another complete sentence expressing contrast. So although here is used with a sentence which is complete, and it is a part of another complete sentence. Now, let's together move on to some practice. Here we'll join bits of sentences. So we'll join the two bits of sentences using these conjunctions, despite, in spite of, or though, and although. So I read this for you. So the weather was awful. We had a dream-like holiday. And you will join these bits of sentences using two ways. One with despite or in spite of, and another with though and although. Now, the second, the exorbitant cost of a space trip. That's the first bit. The second is this. Many people's dream is to travel into space. Well, you have noticed here that the answer is there, but we have to choose the right conjunction. And you have noticed that just after the conjunction, we have a sentence which is kind of full sentence. It's a complete one. The weather was awful. The subject is there, and we have this part as part of a complete sentence. So I think you agree that the best choice is this, although or though. For one good reason, we do not have a noun clause after the conjunction. Let's move on now to the second possibility, to join the two bits. The awful weather. So, we cannot consider this as a sentence, but rather as a noun clause. So, we have no other choice but despite or in spite of. So, I read the complete sentence. In spite of the awful weather, we had a dream-like holiday. Now, when it comes to the second example, you have certainly noticed that here we have a clause and we have a sentence in the second bit. So let's together try to express it or express contrast using these conjunctions, despite or in spite of, or though and although. So in the first possibility, you have noticed that we have a noun clause just after the conjunction. So we have this in spite of and despite, these two equivalents that really fit in there. They are the most suitable before a noun clause. And if we were to use although or though, so we have to change the part which is just after the conjunction using a complete sentence. You see, it's here. The cost of a space trip is exorbitant. So many people's dream is to travel into space. although the cost of a space trip is exorbitant, or though the cost of a space trip is exorbitant. So, to use one of these two or four conjunctions, or two groups of conjunctions, we have to be as careful as possible when it comes to the items that follow, right? Now, we move on to a rubric which is entitled Over to You. Here, you have certainly understood that we'll think, we'll brainstorm ideas, and we'll ask and answer some questions. Right. Now, bearing in mind the advantages shown in the slides or stated in the text, I suppose you all remember the slides that we saw and the text that we read. Consider the following questions. Can you give some good reasons that would make somebody decide to leave the city where they live in order to settle in the countryside? Second question, are there any good reasons that would dissuade them from doing that? And here, by dissuade, I really speak about something that does not really persuade you, does not convince you or encourage you to take a decision or make a decision. Last but not least, we have this question. How would you react if your parents told you about their intention to move from the city where you live in order to settle in the countryside? So, very, very relevant questions. They are relevant to the topic mainly. And you have noticed here that in the last question, you will really air your views and express your ideas and thoughts when it comes to a specific topic. Speaking of which, we'll focus on some students. And exactly like you, they are Tunisian students, and they were asked the same questions. And they have given, different answers. So we'll together watch the video, and we'll use the information to really come up with more answers, or maybe enrich the answers that we may have in mind as students.
Can you give some good reasons that would make somebody decide to leave the city where they live in order to settle in the countryside?
I think people leave the city for a change, in their lifestyle, work, and the routine that they had dealt with for years, because living in the city is actually quite hard, especially when it comes to job opportunities. They're really scarce, so that makes the standards of living really hard, really high too. So yeah, people leave this to settle on the countryside in order to have an easier life financially, and even when it comes to the sense of community, they find themselves surrounded by fewer people, so that makes life easier too.
I really think it's common knowledge that living in the countryside will provide you with a much healthier lifestyle than the routine of the city. No more processed foods and staying up late. And a peaceful life is actually guaranteed, given that you will be more exposed to nature. Besides, there is this feeling of belonging to a community, unlike living isolated in a flat in London or New York City.
Leaving the monotonic, boring life in the city and settling down in the countryside sounds like a good idea for many reasons. Mainly, you are woken up by the singing of birds rather than by the noise from the traffic. Living far away from the city has many benefits, such as being surrounded by the nature and getting the chance to live a peaceful life in a good health thanks to the fresh air and organic food. I would say that the life in the countryside is way easier compared to the life in the city.
I would make someone decide to leave the city and live in the countryside, especially if that person suffers from mental health or physical issues. It is well known that you can find in the countryside a lot of healthy food and clearer air. In addition, there is a lot of green and calm spaces that would make absolutely anyone feel better. And with the fact that the countryside is way cheaper than the city, It would be a perfect place to settle in.
Are there any good reasons that would dissuade them from doing that?
I believe that people wouldn't want to live in the countryside due to the poor status of infrastructure, like when it comes to roads, bridges, electricity. So even means of transport have problems transporting people. So as a result, everyday activities, running errands, shopping, even going to school would be a problem to deal with on a daily basis.
The most obvious thing is that public transport is usually very limited, or perhaps doesn't exist at all in the countryside. The lack of facilities and healthcare does overwhelm villagers sometimes, doesn't it? Not to mention difficult weather conditions and, let's say, unique dangers like wildlife, forest fires, floods, and insects are abundant as well, which can be very annoying at times.
Despite the many privileges that a person can benefit from when settling in the countryside, it still is undeniable that the city has lots of advantages that may make you reconsider your decision. The city offers vast entertainment options and higher opportunities of employment, which equals better salary, which also equals a luxurious life.
I would not recommend it to someone who cannot stand the roughness of nature and cannot leave the ease and comfort of the city. In fact, some people prefer to live next to all public institutions like universities, have a variety of social activities, and love to have the chance to consume different products that you can only find in the city due to a great amount of industries that are in there. So living in the city can provide all life facilities.
How would you react if your parents told you about their intention to move from the city where you live in order to settle in the countryside?
If my parents decide to move to the countryside, I would be terrified because I cannot see myself living in nature. I'm used to modern life.
If my parents told me that they want to move permanently to the countryside, of course I would respect their opinion, but I wouldn't quite agree because I myself am the city's girl. I love hanging out in malls and shopping centers and everything, so I think it would be hard for me to cope with a new environment. Besides, I don't think that I'll be able to make new friends all over again.
I think I would be very glad. I'd be more than glad, actually. I mean, it's always been my dream since I was a little girl, and also, I'm very fond of nature. Therefore, I think I would find my happiness in the countryside. Besides, I'm fed up with the time routine of the city, the pressure, and then the fast food too. So I'm certain I would reach the peak of my well-being in the countryside.
As a teenager who lived in the city ever since birth, I would express my rejection of this idea because I personally like the city, despite its disadvantages, and I got used to its lifestyle from a young age, and I don't think that I could get used to living in any other place other than the city. If I would ever consider moving to the countryside, it would be definitely when I'm older and financially independent.
So, having focused on the video and the answers, I think that some of them really converge with yours, maybe others don't. So we'll use all this group of ideas in a writing task. And we have here the topic of this writing task. So I read this for you. You have recently heard that the parents of a friend of yours are thinking of settling in the countryside. The thing is, or the problem, is that they have mixed feelings about this and are still undecided. They really hesitate. So your friend who is unwilling, reluctant to live in a rural area feels really desperate. So it's a dilemma. It's a problematic situation. So write him a mail in which you will try to help him convince his parents that nothing is better than leading a comfortable life in the city. Right. I'd like to draw your attention to a very important thing. It's this topic and the goal of it. It's mainly a topic which aim is to give advice, to give reasons for your advice, to sympathize with the recipient of your mail, and also to focus on a very, very important thing, is that you have a recipient. Now, let's together focus on a sample, a writing or a mail that was written by one of your friends from another school, and we'll together try to read the mail and try to consider some common mistakes that some students may make. So I read this for you. Dear Amin, if your recipient is a boy, or dear Amina, if your recipient is a girl, I've just heard of your parents' intention to settle in the countryside, and I can imagine the difficult situation you're going through. First of all, let me tell you that I feel really shocked and depressed, exact like you, and that your parents would be totally wrong if they decide to leave the vibrant and amazing town which you live. If I were in their shoes, I will think twice before doing that. Indeed, the drawbacks of living in the countryside outweigh the advantages. I move on to the second part of it. That's why I recommend you to talk to them about your worries in a calm way. Start by telling them that leaving your city will definitely deprive you from all your favorite activities like shopping and hanging out with your best friends. You should also remind them of the lack of much basic facilities. Even healthcare and transport are absent nearly in most villages. Most important of all, you need to inform them that settling in the countryside would certainly affect your school results in a very serious way. I hope my advice will help you convince your parents. Yours faithfully, Ayhan or Huya. Right. So, having focused on this example, you must have pinpointed some mistakes that lend themselves to different types of mistakes. Speaking of which, we'll try to have a look at this first mistake, exact. And it's a mistake of form. Exact is an adjective. Tense. Let's decide. Another mistake is this WH word, this which, and it's a mistake of missing word. We'll get to this in more details later on. Will. Your colleague wrote this sentence: if I were in their shoes, I will think twice before doing that. It's a mistake of tense. This indeed. There is a problem of spelling here. Now, we'll move on to the second part of this mail. Sorry, before that we have this item to consider, outweigh, right? So it's a word which is unnecessary, which has been used here. The second part, so it's recommend, is awkward, it's not really correct, so it's a wrong word. It's from, which is a mistake of preposition. Much. So I repeat the sentence. You should also remind them of the lack of much basic facilities. So it's a grammar mistake. Absent nearly. So there is here a problem of word order. Effect. And it's a common mistake that not only this student can make, but many other students can make this mistake. So most important of all, you need to inform them that life in the countryside will certainly affect your school results in a serious way. There's a problem of spelling, but this implies that there is also a problem of form, and we'll see this later on while editing this mail, last but not least, we have this mistake of formality. This yours faithfully. Okay, this complimentary clause. Now, let's get ready for the final and corrected draft. So, we have here the first part, and we'll focus on this sample bit by bit. So, dear Amin, dear Amina, I've just heard of your parents' intention to settle in the countryside, and I can imagine the difficult situation you're going through. First of all, let me tell you that I feel really shocked and depressed. So it's this exact which must be replaced by an adverb, exactly like you, and that your parents would be totally wrong if they decided instead of this decide. So it's conditional type 2. You have the result in the present conditional. So if they decided to leave, your parents would be totally wrong. But so far, they have not made their final decision. Now, let's move on to the next item to consider. It's this WH word. And I promised a few seconds ago that I'll get back to this in more details. So, we may consider this as a mistake of missing word, because your colleague forgot to use in which, the preposition, or we can also consider it as a mistake of wrong word. So instead of this which, he should have used were. Now, if I were in their shoes, and once more we come across this conditional type 2, it is if plus past simple. So you see, this will is really awkward. It has to be replaced by would. So I would think twice before doing that. This indeed. There is a problem of spelling, so we'll focus more on this item, this indeed. So it's one word. Maybe your friend had in mind this in fact. So indeed should be written as one complete word. So indeed, the drawbacks of living in the countryside outweigh the advantages. Your friend made the following mistake. So he used or just before the verb. He did not consider this as a full, complete verb. So the right verb to use is this outweigh the advantages. Now, let's move on to the second part of this mail. It's here. And you will notice again that the words in focus are written in red. So we'll take the time which we feel really sufficient to consider the mistakes and come up with or think about the right words to use or the best way to remedy these mistakes. So that's why I recommend you to talk to them about your worries in a calm way. Well, actually, you recommend something, or you recommend that something should be done. So our colleague here has made this mistake. It's the mistake of wrong word. So he should have used this advise. So that's why I advise you to talk to them about your worries in a calm way. Start by telling them that leaving your city will definitely deprive you of, you see, of and not from. So that's the mistake he made. He might have taken this verb as an equivalent for the verb to prevent. You prevent someone from something or doing something, but you deprive that person of something. So will definitely deprive you of all your favorite activities like shopping and hanging out with your best friends. You should also remind them of the lack of much basic facilities. You have certainly noticed that after much over there we have a countable plural noun, it's facilities. So many is the right word to use. Even healthcare and transport are absent nearly in most villages, and you remember that we have considered this as a mistake of word order, so nearly absent. It's an adverb that should precede the adjective, which is after the auxiliary. We continue. So most important of all, you need to inform them that settling in the countryside would certainly effect. So you all remember that we considered this as a spelling mistake that has led to a problem of form, maybe, because effect in itself is a noun. And you all agree that we need a verb after will. So will certainly affect your school results in a very serious way. Now let's go to the, or move on to the conclusion. So I hope my advice will help you convince your parents. Well, so far so good. Except for this, yours faithfully. It's very obvious that it's a formal way to finish a correspondence, namely a business correspondence. So if I were in your friend's shoes, I would use this best wishes. It's way more informal. All the more so as your friend is addressing a friend. So the student here should have borne in mind that he's addressing a friend. So best wishes is way more appropriate than this yours faithfully. Right. So that's all for today's lesson. I hope you have benefited from it and enjoyed it. So allow me to thank you again 1 million times for existing, and above all, take good care of yourselves. See you. Bye-bye.